Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you again for this third session of the day of this 5 days online faculty development program on outcome-based education. Now, I would like to introduce to you to our third panelist, Dr. Surabjit Banerjee. Subhrajit Banerjee is currently working as an Associate Dean Postgraduate Studies and Research at AKTU in charge training and placement, and he has done his B.Arch from Utkal University in 2001, M.C.P from IIT Kharagpur in 2004, and Ph.D from IIT Kharagpur in 2015. He had a total 16 years experience. Dr. Banerjee comes with a vast experience in the field of urban planning and has worked with the likes of Kolkata Metropolitan Development Authority and Department of International Development. His areas of specializations are high-rise and tall building design, building regulations, norms and statutes, cities, town and regional planning, urban infrastructure planning and design, urban governments and policy formulation, urban management, social planning, and urban demographics. We welcome you, sir, for this session. Now I would like to hand it over to you, sir. You can
Thank you,
kindly share
madam,
your.
for this so vastly elaborating my experience. I do not know how much really experience I have gathered from the morning session. It still seems that I would have really been a teacher of Professor Chakraborty and Dr. Akhtar. I'm a student of both of these eminent teachers, so I still think I'm in the process of learning. But yes, today, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, Dr. Bipasha and Professor Kanika, and of course Professor Sabriwal. So I will like to share my screen with the participants. So what I'll be talking about, may I?
Sure, sir, sure,
Yeah,
sir.
so I'll be sharing the screen, and yeah. So I welcome all the participants and very good afternoon to all of you. Uh, so today basically I'll be speaking on the measurability of the qualitative aspects of architectural education, or architecture education, whatever we call it. Uh, if we recall the presenters in the early morning session, basically we both of them have spoken about their vast experiences and different methods of actually how architectural education can be uh, it can be shifted with a new paradigm. Uh, if we look into the present context or the present scenario of what is happening in the different architectural schools today, we find that there are different variations in different parts of the country, but more or less a particular syllabus or structure has been defined by the statutory body council of architecture, and we all have bindings to adhere to that. But ultimately what comes is what is the output. I mean, if we look into this entire teaching as an industry, or if we look into the entire teaching as a process, we actually are making the future architects for the future generations. So can we compare it with the uh, in a very crude terms, manufacturing of architects? So if you look into that term, definitely till date, or we all teachers we generally emphasize on the architectural design studios, and we say that it is the prime part of architectural education, or the prime subject or the core subject of architectural education. And of course the syllabus, if you look into the syllabus and we analyze the syllabus, we find that there are 10 credits, 9 credits, and with compared to any other subjects which are there. So today basically I will be focusing on the design studio part, a bit of the design studio part, what is happening, how, what new approaches, some new approaches have already been undertaken by the different schools, how they are, what they are, how can they be compared. And of course I would like to at the last I would present before you two examples, one in the European country and another in the African country. I'll not call them developing or developed, or underdeveloped nations, because rightly, as my previous speaker has said, who has called them developed? Is it the so not going into all these controversies, I will simply give you two examples of African, one of the African country, which is Nigeria, and the other is Russia. And I'll put forward what are the qualitative aspects and how they have been trying to assess the performance of the students and measure the qualitative aspects of education. So if we look into the innovative methods which are right now there, so we will find that innovative methods in architectural education, we'll find that new approaches or alternative thinking has already started in different forms. And the primary focus of this alternative thinking is how do we generate, or we give education to the students after class 12th at the undergraduate level and bring them into the profession. So there have been many suggestive new approaches and methods which are going on in different parts of the country. But whatever the methods are, basically they focus primarily on making maximum use of whatever is learned and reducing wastage of what is learned. If we come into this, then ultimately whatever we learn in the 5-year period, the architect, after a student graduates, he or she should be able to make use maximum of it and should reduce the wastage of, minimize the reduce of the wastage. But none of these methods, basically they have been scientifically tested, or they have gone through certain pedagogic experiments or in-depth observations and logical solutions to it, whatever issues are coming out of that, or how much are they really actually uplifting the quality or quality of architecture education in the different schools. So they have not been tested so far. But what we have understood is most of the schools, they generally focus on contextual education part. I mean, the contextual, when we give them a design problem, we as teachers, we tell them, look into the context, look into what is happening. There's a site which is given, and we said you go into the contextual design of it. So what do we mean by that? What is context? Is it only the climate? Is it only the physical infrastructure what is available there? Or is it also, or does it also include the socio-economic background of the people, or the the people who are staying there, or the part of the country where it is? And basically, you see, if we see into this contextual design, I think, is very important, but it has to be worked out on a very exhaustive manner. So now if we ask ourselves as teachers, what is design? Very basic question. We ask every student, what is design? What do you understand by design? Right at the 3rd semester. It's a problem or a requirement where the problem is identified by the user and the use, in very simple terms. So if that is that, then what is the conventional methods that are being practiced today? Let us see. The conventional method is basically classroom-based or oral form of teaching methods. If we look into this very basic, the basic conventional methods, they are the classroom-based oral form of teaching methods. Along with that, some new practices like the audiovisual methods or the interactive methods have been merged, or they are simply punched. But to what extent, to what proportion, that is nowhere defined. Why? These questions. So we say that if we punch into these new practices of audiovisual methods and interactive methods, we will get we'll engage the students into day-to-day activities, make the students learn to engage themselves in day-to-day activities. So basically what comes out of this is the basic primary education system, which is also running in different parts of the country, and we are preaching them. If we look into the system, if we look into our present scenario, the primary education system also, we are introducing the audiovisual method. So what is different? How is it different? So in a school, a large amount of theories and subjects are taught, of which very few students encounter to apply later in the life of their career. Here in architecture, we have to understand that architecture is a professional course. And we also say that preaching should be more than teaching. But in what form? How do we preach? What is the optimum quantum of preaching? When we have a syllabus, we have certain guidelines within the syllabus, and we go about both teaching and preaching. But to what extent? How much of preaching? How much of teaching? What to teach? What to preach? That is not defined. So when we are, suppose there is most of the students who start their after class 12th, who get admission into the B.Arch courses, till their class 12th, they have been solving calculus, differential equations, integral equations. They have been solving other parts of, into depth of mathematics, into depth of chemistry, into depth of physics. But how much are they really applying this? So my question is, or my concern is, why are we asking for a student from JEE mains? We say that student after JEE mains has to give an aptitude test, be it in the form of NATA, be it in the form of whatever it is. And this has been going on for years. So what is he applying after class 12th? On the first day, he comes to the college and he realizes till the last day of the last month, whatever he has been taught or whatever he has been practicing in his home or whatever interest he has gained, very few portion of it really, or partially, some amount, a good quantum of it is actually not applicable or will not be applicable in his future. So here comes the question of the students' curiosity. So if we look into this, again, from the first year, we have mathematics, we have visual arts, we have basic design, we have graphics, we have structures. Now that structure continues up to the 4th year. And in the 5th year, we are expected that in the thesis part, the student comes out with an output of whatever he learns. But my concern is, how many thesis students actually really comes up with a structural detailing of whatever project he has done. They don't come up. So what is that knowledge? Whatever knowledge he has gained. Now let us leave alone the school education part. Somebody may contradict me saying school education is something different and you come up here and architecture is a very professional course. So you can, come up with something. But let us see these. Why in first year did we teach him or her mathematics? Just to solve a couple of bending moment problems for the structural subjects up to the fourth year. Why did we teach him or her visual arts? Why? Why did we teach him or her basic design principles? Yes, probably for the design studios. But how much of it is implemented from the third semester? As teachers, within the syllabus, within the time frame, within the syllabus guidelines, how much of basic design principles do we keep at the backyard of the mind while assessing the design made by the student in the studio? Why did we teach him or her graphics? So these questions have to be thought of. And in the conventional courses, conventional methods, these were there and is still there. Yes, I do agree. In some schools, in most of the schools, some of it has been changed. Some of it has been, I would not say revised, but I would say remodeled, and a new form has been given. Now, if we look into the design studio in the first year, in the second year, in the third year, in the fourth year, how much of that fine thread of linkage is present? And how do all these ultimately give us this final thesis? Where are the parameters while we are assessing and while we are sitting for the thesis juries, we are assessing the theses, maybe as internal guides or external people, whoever we are, where are we keeping these parameters in mind that a student has gone through this extensive classroom teaching or theory teaching or whatever exposure he has been given in practical and in lectures or in maybe tutorials, and what are the applications of it? I am right now concerned only with the outcome of the education system. I am not thinking beyond that. I am not thinking the student is still a product of the institution. I'm still thinking he or she is within the studentship scenario. But till that student comes into the fifth year, what parameters have we integrated? It still remains a question. So I think it is it's a right time, or maybe the call of the day, that we teachers who are taking design studios, we rethink and we try to find out a criteria of assessment, a framework, a methodology of assessing the students. Next. So if we look into the learning process, we have to think the basics of learning science and learning psychology. We are concerned about child psychology, we are concerned about student psychology, we are concerned about teacher psychology, but have we really given a thought about the learning psychology associated with it, or the learning science? So this gentleman, he said a very good thing. He said, you can teach a student a lesson for a day, but if you can teach him to learn by creating curiosity, he will continue the learning process as long as he lives. So basically, we have to think that we will not teach. We will teach them to learn. But in most of the, I mean, the entire, if you look into the course curriculum, if you look into the existing pedagogies, we are emphasizing more on the teaching process rather than on the learning process. Some way or the other, we have to make the student curious to learn. That is where something is missing. It is not our fault, because we as individuals, we teachers as individuals, or we professionals who are coming to share our professional experience with the students as individuals, we are bound by time guidelines, we are bound by certain syllabus guidelines. So that is what I think is one of the major concerns. So another gentleman, he said, our senses are evolved to work together. We have these senses, the vision, so they are evolved to work together. Vision influencing hearing, which means that if we learn best if we stimulate several senses at one time. So the question is, when we are going into the oral presentations, or
I think we have lost connection from Dr. Banerjee's end. We'll try to contact him and we'll resume the session shortly. Please stay in tune. Please stay with us. Sir is trying to join us again.
Hello, am I
Yes,
audible?
yes, sir.
I'm
You
extremely
got
sorry.
disconnected for a while.
There has been a power cut in my area, so
We
I
can hear
am
you.
extremely sorry for that.
No issues, sir. No issues.
No, it's okay.
So I'll continue from where I was.
Yes, yes. Please resume it. Thank you so much, sir.
So it is said that our senses are evolved to work together, and vision influencing hearing, for example, which means that we learn best if we stimulate all our senses together. So I think architecture is such a subject, such a profession, where you need to have all your senses stimulating together to develop the curiosity of the student. You need all the senses of the students to stimulate together. So coming to this, if we look into the seven styles of learning, or the seven senses, what we call it. So we have the visual, the oral or the auditory, the verbal, the physical, the logical, the social, and the solitary. So a student has to be motivated, or has to have this exposure where he should have all these seven styles of learning to stimulate all his senses. Auditory, just like visual perception, audio, you also need to have a solitary or interpersonal or self-study mode for the entire learning process. At the same time, you also need to have a social interaction wherein the student should learn to work in groups and with other people. The logical senses, they are driven by the mathematical learnings the student has. So how can we actually say that mathematics which has been taught to him or her, even in the first year or the first part of the year, will not be helpful? So the pedagogy has to imbibe all these seven styles of learning. The pedagogy has to interlink all these seven styles of learning. Only then, I think, the curiosity can develop within a student to learn. And only if that happens, then I think what in so-called inverted commas we teach is fruitful. So coming to the next part, we say that we also, it's not our saying, this gentleman Paul Hammers, he said, and we also agree to that. Most of us agree to that in architectural education. The best way is to learn is to do, and the worst way to teach is to talk. We see many students in the studio work, they come up with one or two sheets and they move their fingers here and there and they try explaining. The general reaction of the teacher is, hawa mein baat mat karo. We say that, but we have to realize that why is he talking so much? because probably he has been taught, not been taught properly. So I think, or to my experience, talking less and doing more hands-on gives a better way of learning. If you look into this chart, there are different ways of teaching on the right, you see, or there are different ways of learning, I should say, not teaching. First is lecture, reading, audiovisual, demonstration, group discussion, practice, teaching others. So if this is followed, I mean, if we go down the measurements, we see with lectures, only 5% of what has been lectured is actually learned by the student. So till demonstration in this chart, I think that is passive teaching, that is not active teaching. Group discussion and practice is participatory teaching. And teaching others is the best way, because you can only teach others if you yourself is very clear about the subject. So in fact, if we look into this participatory teaching and teaching others portion, which the last part doesn't generally come in the student's profile, unless there are a few exceptions within their own system, ecosystem. This participatory teaching is actually active teaching, I would say. I am not sure how many of you will agree with me, but actually this is the present scenario. Now, I was talking something about educational psychology. What is the psychology of education? If we understand the education psychology, then we can understand better ways of learning. Because education psychology gives memory improvements. We keep the habit of learning and practicing new things. We also develop to learn in multiple ways. And we also gain experience, practical experience. At the same time, we also would prefer to teach what we have learned. So that completes the total educational psychology. So the shift in the approach, if you look into take a glance of it, many schools give hands-on workshop for various sub-courses within the program. Hands-on workshop for various sub-courses within the program to design, to build, and to maintain. Educating professional requires practicing professionals and academics to work closely hand in hand. So basically it is collaborative. Total education system is collaborative of academicians and practitioners. Practitioners bring in their experiences which are not written down or documented in the form of in pen and paper, and that gives a thoughtful and critical approach to the students. So studio based or lab based, whatever we say, learning is the most effective. It should be continuous and is multidimensional learning. Application of the theories in the studio is necessary. A student is taught acoustics, but where have we made it mandatory for him or her to apply that? Even in the thesis, if there is an auditorium designed by the student, we see that a prototype plan is what is coming up. We never ask the students, or even if we ask, the student is not able to answer what acoustical treatment he or she has given, other than saying that I will put soft boards on the sides of the walls or insulating materials. This is a very broad answer. For this answer, acoustics was not necessary to be taught. So the approach of the students is different. Why? Because when he or she was being taught acoustics, a gentleman from the mechanical department or the electrical department or physics has taught him or her, has taken the class. An architect who has designed an auditorium has not highlighted his or her experience in the flaws of an auditorium if not designed properly or acoustical treatment is absent. There is in most of the schools, I think all of you will agree, in today's context, if we look into the Council of Architecture website, we have 500 odd numbers of architectural schools imparting undergraduate education all over the country. How many schools are really able to have that human resource for these type of specialized subjects? Even if they would like to have, their locational aspect and other administrative aspects doesn't allow them to do so. I'm not going into the details of that, but it is a fact. If I ask a student of the final year or even a pass out student that can you tell me how much of what should be the AHU or the air handling unit space, what should be the dimensions or what should be the area, how is it decided or what is the equation behind it, I'm sure nobody will be able to answer. I mean, most of them won't be able to answer. They have been taught what is an AHU, they have been taught the functions of an AHU, but they have not been taught how to incorporate that into design, because the intervention of an architect was not there. Now, the question is, if we have these people into the profession in the coming 5-10 years, then the generation next to them, I would really fear what they would know. So this is very important. Sorry. So what can be the new approaches? So the first thing is, a studio is a sub-course within an architectural course, which shapes up the design skills of an architecture student through the entire course of 5-year undergraduate program. This is what we have to keep in mind. So it is the sub-course, but the most vital course wherein all the application of the theory subject should come into picture. Studio or application-based study gives a much better way of understanding. Whatever has been taught to them, if that not applied in the studio, that is actually blurred behind the screen. They can never understand it. And each subject should contribute to the studio. And that, if each subject contributes to the studio makes the student comprehend the subject and the theories in it more effectively. Extensive involvement of the students in application of theories of design and associated knowledge in the design when he or she is formulating a design problem. This gentleman said that experience has shown that students learn technical skills more efficiently and incorporate them more readily to the building design process when the skills are acquired on as need basis during ongoing design projects. So the needs should be, the skills should be as need basis. That is very important. So integrative studio approach can only happen if all these come together to ultimately formulate the design process. We need to have an assessment tool to ensure that all these 6 components at least should be there in the design. Let this tool be tailor-made. It has to be tailor-made, because emphasis on each of these components in different years, in different types of buildings, in different classification of buildings will be different. But when we are assessing the design as a teacher, we should make sure that we come up with some component, some portion of each component, and we assess on each of these components. We teach them golden ratio, but we never see the implementation of that. Even if we see, we never have made that a parameter for our assessment process. So unless we assess the student, how can we measure the qualitative aspects of this education system? It is the students who are going to say that. It is the students who will reflect how much is effective, how much is ineffective, or to what extent the entire pedagogy is effective. So prime focus on exercising the studio with the students should be on the process rather than the product. Through what process the student has arrived at the product, that should be more important, not on the product. This is what I think. That is my thought process is this. But in the past, it is observed that this purpose of studio is achieved to a satisfactory level in very few institutions in the country. The key reason responsible for this plight is the use of inappropriate technology. I am not saying only technology will give the desired output. I'm not saying that. But definitely inappropriate technology or absence of proper technology will definitely affect the process and the output. So they can be taken forward through multiple stage studies in understanding of the theme. We in the class, we teachers, we make a design brief, we float it to the students. Or we give them a theme and we also tell them to work on the design theme and the design brief. But on the theme, I think we should make them work more. I mean, if I repeat the same thing of what Professor Chakraborty said in the later half of the morning session, is that why each student should have one problem and say, same number of plans, same number of sections, same number of elevations. Rather, I would say that the student should have a study on the multiple studies on the different stages of developing the theme and how they have developed their concept. Let us not look at the output in terms of whether he or she has covered the elevation, the section, or the plans. Let us see what process the student has gone through. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Perfect.
No, again, there is some sort of power cut, but thankfully I am connected with the hotspot.
Yes, sir, you are connected.
Okay. So what I was saying is conventional approach is this. We have a design brief and then there is a data collection by the student where there is a lot of data. The student is absolutely unaware of how much of the data has to be used and how much has to be thrown away. Then again, the student goes for a case study. Then again, when he or she goes for the case study, he looks into everything about the case study, the tendencies to adapt functional layouts, design features, etc. And if we look into their case study aspects, most of their photographs and most of their data are irrelevant features. And then they produce a concept and then they give us a design. So if we now look into the marking system or the assessment system of the student, from the design brief to the final design in this sketch, from the design brief to the final design, slowly the percentage of weightage also increases and we have the maximum weightage in the final design. I would say this is not right. This is the call of the day that we shift from this process. Let us have a studio theme. And let these be stages. Let them be integrated with one another. Let there be a outcome which is, just maybe in sketchy concept form even. But at least the study should be intensive. That student should feel the space. The student should know what data to use. So this is what I think could be a new design approach. And with this, we can have multi-stage process and multi-directional evolved design. Then, for example, if the studio theme is biomimicry, that means any biological animal or plant or whatever living being, that becomes the theme. Then what happens is, if that becomes the theme of the design studio, then the student knows that how that particular animal or plant exactly behaves, how it functions, how it reciprocates, what are the reflexes, how it stimulates. So everything is, all the aspects of that particular plant or animal is known to the student. So this was a biomimicry studio, which was, this is an example which I have taken from a secondary source, of course. This was in one of the universities in Netherlands. And this is how they have taken, the theme was microorganism. And they were told to create a space form with the theme. So these were some of the outputs which I could get as photographs. So what is popular is not always right. Now, if we need to do that, if you look into any class of a group of students of 40 in the architectural schools today, we have very specific 3 categories of students. One who are very bright, very good, very serious, very attentive, but very mechanical. The second category is very thoughtful, very innovative, tries to be more innovative, but lost out in the world. And the third category is whom we actually, every day after the college hours, we pray that the third category passes out and we are free from headache. So I think for all the 3 categories, the studio guides needs to have specific attitudes. Today, in a class of 40, if we look into any architectural design studio, we have 2 to 3 teachers teaching together. Let one of them deal with one category for the entire semester. This is a better solution. So this there's an architect Vinu Daniel. So he practices mud brick architecture and is also into teaching. So he actually had done this workshop. I've taken some pictures. Workshop course on machinery, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, and in-scale models and installations within the theory subjects. He had combined in the studio. He still feels that it is not, it is not foolproof, but it was a very good attempt, I should say. I mean, he also thinks, we all. Similarly, visual arts. We see a number of students very interested in fashion design. कहीं पे कोई cultural program होता है, they are the first one to come up. Can we not intermingle all this activity with the visual arts and the basic design courses? So this was one, this last right-hand side bottom photograph was one example of that, where the students were told to actually showcase themselves with different forms. Next is learning building structures. Students who pursue design-based course in comparison with those who take up theory-based courses like pure science, engineering, economic sciences, or languages are more driven or pulled by visual information or physical entities, as the main intention of the course is to produce design of a physical entity. The structural design and related subjects can be introduced through the model making process. Instead of having a model making course itself, can we not integrate that with the structures to give the students a better, and this is happening in many schools of late. I know one Dr. Harimohan Pillai. He is actually taking up these type of workshops. Though he is an architect, but he is taking up this type of workshops wherein he is hands-on in the model making workshop. He is making the students to understand what are the different types of loads, how they function, how the different structural elements are working, where they are failing. So this can be taken up along with this. Then model making does not come as something for time spending. Model making has to be integrated with this, and the purpose is this. If we look into landscape architecture, I think sensitization and sensitivity both has to be incorporated. So it can be sensitization towards plants or plant life. Let each student pick up one plant which is used in landscape architecture, and let him or her go into the details of the application in designing a particular space or various spaces within a particular campus. So what will happen? The student will know how that particular plant behaves, where it can be planted, what are the maintenance issues, what are the load factors, what are the aesthetics. So I think let him or her have one plant in the entire course and incorporate that into the studio design and into his or her landscape architecture, landscape part of the design, whatever it is, site planning process. So at least he will know one plant. So in the later on in his practice, he can know multiple plants as need based, whatever the situation demands out of him. Similarly, in urban design also, I would say each student takes up one particular neighborhood and say that it is my neighborhood, and then go into the details of that, and then they can have different type of group discussions, and they can work out and they can incorporate that into the urban design student. So at least the students tries to understand how a neighborhood functions, what are the problems of a neighborhood, and how the people react to the problems, and how that neighborhood is actually in correlation with his or her project site. At least that assessment can be developed into the student. And then the application of the urban design principles when we give a institutional township design studio, maybe in the 8th semester. Let the student travel and have a travel log. I know in my college, a travel log is a mandatory part of the training program. When the student comes to the college after the internship, he or she submits a travel log. For the last 3 years, I have been in the training in charge. The last 3 years, hardly I can say 5 to 6 travel logs were really worth. They actually really made the travel log wherein some learning process is there. You can understand we could assess some understanding or perception of the student while making the travel log. Rest all is photographs and sticking this and that. But can we make this travel log and incorporate this into the elective of photography that we have? With this, the student not only learns photography, but he or she also learns a documentation, and well illustrated travel log is what he or she can make. Because architecture today is diversified. It is not stuck up to buildings and all this. architects are also working as product designers. They're working as animators. So why not develop that curiosity of what happens and how? Because that is a specialization. At the undergraduate level, we cannot go into all those depth. But at least we can give them a glimpse of what could be done. So collaboration of architectural education and practice culminates in the highest level at a place where, where they both meet, and that is the campus. The campus where we impart the education. I think that is where the collaboration of architectural education and practice should meet, should culminate. Regular exposure to students to practice, an opportunity at doorstep to get trained themselves. So we have to give them the infrastructure or the opportunities. We have to open up the world before them and develop a research-oriented academic atmosphere. Just keeping dissertation or thesis will not do. I can assure majority of the pass out students in any school, if you look into the thesis report or the dissertation report, they really have followed the basic formatting principles of a report. I once said to one of my students, see, report is like a storybook. It's like a story. You should not have jerks into that. If you have jerks, the reader loses his or her readability. And that entire thing depends upon how well you have formatted and what format you have followed up, how well you have composed the report. This is an integral part of the research. Why should we teach research methodology at the master's level? We can cut down a portion of that and have it at the bachelor's level only. Punch it with the dissertation. Give them some theory lectures. Let them have a proper report which is readable. Otherwise, tomorrow when they go and I know the first thing, this today in today's market, most of this MNCs or corporate bodies like ILFS, Ernst and Young, they are all hiring architects and planners. So what is the first thing they give them? To compile a report. So we have to make them well equipped. Keeping the faculty engage in practice more synchronously with the academics. Faculty should have practice and should be engaged in practice. There should be a proper system for that. Potential contributions to the city and its people for a wide range of services the faculty team is specialized in. Has any college even enmarked the potential contributions they can give with the existing list of faculties to the city and its people in any form? We are doing some, some kahin pe tuberculosis program is going on, this program, that program. But why not this? Something related professionally. Let it be a service. What happens when we provide that service as a team of faculties? We automatically will engage the students into that. So they will know that actually, as an individual and as a team, where they can render their services to. So wide range of service, larger the exposure of students to multidisciplines within architecture. So if we make it student responsive, we have to, sorry. So if we have to make student responsive skill development, definitely we have to follow this entire framework or whatever it is, wherein everything is interlinked with the other. Be it reading, be it discussion, be it communication, be it sketching, book reviews with debates, outdoor sketches. Now, just a minute, please. Predominantly, three systems and institutions represent three different architectural traditions and heritage. In the, I mean, this example, the first example I'm coming to. When the Russians had their first research study, to have to assess what are the deficiencies in the architectural education in their system. So what they analyzed was there are basically three types of systems, and they represent three different architectural traditions and heritages. One is the German, particularly the South German portion. Architectural practice and education is seen as very technical oriented with a high share of structural engineering in architectural education. This is one school of thought. Teaching and research institute within the university provides basic and advanced courses both for engineering and architectural students, emphasizing holistically the approach to sustainable design and construction. On the contrary, the British architectural education was more oriented on the qualitative understanding rather than formalistic knowledge. It dictated the global trends and strongly influenced the development of contemporary architecture. In UK, had 3 schools in the top list of 10 architectural schools in the world, with strong focus on sustainability issues and international orientation. Art, architecture, design, all the three played important role in securing these positions for the British architectural education. Its methodology strongly relied on the case study approach and relation to practice. This was very different from what the Germans had. The Russians, on the other hand, were more traditional and they shaped throughout the history of the national architecture. They were more socialist and artistic in discipline. There were many attempts to reform the higher education system, including the several iterations of the Bologna process in Russia, which did not bring the expected fundamental change. And most of the architectural higher education institutions in Russia remained conservative and rigid in their approach. So what were the problems and issues Russia was facing? While cherishing the classical style and the traditional skills like sculpture and hand drawing, Russian architecture schools lost its contact with the contemporary architectural development. So as a result, architectural education became less interesting for the students, who were automatically or basically were attracted for the different fast growing and changing world design philosophies, tools, construction material, technologies as an integral part of the global process. So this clearly showed that Russia had a problem. Now, next, I will basically put forward what they came up with. They said that technology for the architects has to be taught. Technology for the architects is required. So they had an emphasis to teach more of structural part into their education syllabus or whatever it is. So first thing what they did was introduce students to the roles of other participants in the design process. That means they started this interactive process of role playing. Make students familiar with the materials that are used in construction and their properties, qualities, advantages, disadvantages. Give them a thorough knowledge of the theoretical and technical sciences important in design and construction. Provide abilities necessary for independent consideration of engineering topics and solution to simple engineering problems. Sorry. To provide students with enough engineering knowledge to be able to collaborate with professional engineers. So these were the steps which the academic council, in 2012 in Russia, they took this step and they implemented this. But how far it has been, their issues and problems have been addressed, that is still a question to be answered. So my point of view is just incorporating this or introducing the students to the structural and in the engineering portion of it. Will that work? Or is it the solution? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I mean, it's an open-ended question. I don't have the answer. Maybe you have. But it's still something which has to be assessed. Another example, some other steps which they also have taken is provide students with an understanding of constraints due to economic and technical aspects of construction business, expose students to the principles of sustainability, prepare students for further education in the master's level. That means, what are they saying with this? That their undergraduate level of education is not sufficient for the student to be a professional. Develop an intuition for structural behavior of the building. So they are also trying to make this developed within a student the intuition of the structural behavior. So what I am trying to emphasize is, target was to assess, I mean, target was to assess the knowledge base and understanding of the students after few years, so that uh, this whatever was existing problems or issues were these they were facing, the schools were facing in Russia, that could be solved. But I mean, these were the steps which they had taken, but uh, still it remains a question. How will you assess it? On what basis? So I'll basically give this example where in Nigeria, a researcher, he tried to assess, or he tried to evaluate the students' design studio performance. He did it because there was a national need that the accreditation of various disciplines were going on in their country, which was actually acknowledging the fall of the standard of education in their country. So the process, the aim of the research was to evaluate the design studio performance, and 3 schools of architecture were taken with the aim that they could ensure qualitative architectural in Nigeria, in their country. So they had these objectives. They divided the performance of the students into two phases, from 1994 to 2003, which is 1 decade, and from 2004 to 2013, which is the next decade. And they tried to make a comparative analysis of the performance of these 2 decades. And they took certain parameters, which I'll discuss definitely. And the reason was to determine the good or the bad performance of the students, whatever are, and make certain recommendations so that the qualitative part of architectural education is ensured. So these 3 schools were taken. The basic approach to teaching of architectural design in Nigeria, they follow basic 3 approaches. So these were the 3 approaches in the 3 different schools. One is the theory and project method. The second followed the studio design module method, and the third followed the integrated project method. So what was there in the theory and project method? Architectural design tasks are logically arranged in order of degree of complexity by the school. So in the first school, they designed the architectural design tasks logically and arranged them in the order of complexities. It starts with the least difficult one, and as the semester progresses, the students are drilled over the 3 design tasks in a particular studio level, and usually from this happens from the second year. So students of a particular design task collect data from schools, data rooms, libraries, and secondary sources. Then the student proceeds to analysis, synthesis, and design evolution under the supervision of the studio lecturers. When the design task is completed, the studio masters issue out another one problem of greater complexity, which is from a different class of building. So this is one approach in the first school. The second school, they followed the design module method, wherein in the use of this teaching approach, the architectural design tasks are grouped into modules. So here the modules were not on the complexities, increasing order of complexities, and everybody had to go through everything. But here they were grouped into different modules, like one with the urban design part, the other with the traditional architecture part, the third with the industrial and agricultural buildings, fourth with the rural development part. Then the content of each design module was marked out. So each module had contents. At any one period or any particular semester, the studio supervision activities of the lecturers are compartmentalized according to the design module. So according to the design module, the student will work. And juries were held at two levels. One at the internal level, which we say, that means the studio coordinators, they judged the students. And of course, the others came and judged them, who were the other module coordinators. And the third school followed the integrated project method. This integrated project method, the approach was procedural and sequential and involved a lot of logistic preparation on the part of the lecturers before the involvement of the student. The integrated project method first starts in the first semester of the third year of the architectural design and goes to the fifth year of the study. The teaching approach of the design learning starts with semi-rural communities for the third years, to the semi-urban centers in the fourth years, and to the urban centers in the fifth years. And this integrated part had, and this approach had 4 stages. One is the documentation, the other is the analysis, the third is the synthesis, and the fourth is the plan formulation and the proposal. So these were the 3 approaches by the 3 schools. So first thing what they analyzed or compared was, in each academic session, what was the percentage of students who were passing out? What they analyzed was, from 1994, if you look into the 2 tables here, from 1994 to 2013, over the 2 decades, there has been a constant decrease in the number of students passing out in every institution. And the average pass out percentage was something around 50 to 55. What they analyzed also was, over the 2 decades, the integrated approach which was followed by this particular school had the least pass out. So they tried to analyze the reason behind it. So just a minute. Sorry. Next, they had the assessment of funding and studio facilities. So first they thought that let us assess the funding and also the facilities that we are providing to the students. So each school wise, they had taken certain samples and they analyzed. So what they analyzed was, if you look into these 3 tables, studio facility in the first, in the second, in the third, all 3 were acceptable. That means infrastructure was not responsible. So next what they did was, Next, they thought that probably the admission process by which we are taking students is faulty. So we are not probably getting the right student, and that is why the pass percentage is decreasing. That also was correct. What they understood was accepting wrong admission. In majority, in all the three schools, more than 80% of the students said that architecture, admission to the architecture course was a wrong decision for them. So this is one of the biggest parameters that we have to understand. The question lies here is what I have told at the beginning also. Till class 12, you are orienting a student with physics, chemistry, mathematics, and then you are expecting aesthetics, architecture, visual arts. Why? I mean, why? Why are we taking admissions from engineering entrance examinations? Why are we assessing them through physics, chemistry, mathematics? Probably many are coming with the conception or without the conception of what actually architecture is, or with the conception of probably architecture is another form of engineering. And that was proved right here. So ultimately, again, assessment of funding, structures, and another thing which admission mode, then they also assessed another factor, which was the reading culture within the students. How much reading culture do they have? Which is an intrinsic part of their curriculum. They found out that most of the students had reading culture. They were reading because they had to pass. But the question here is, they were not oriented to appropriate reading or reading materials or whatever it is related to the architecture, related to conceptualization or visualization process of in architecture. So that was a major problem. So with these parameters, they came up with certain conclusions. Inadequate studio facilities, lack of reading culture, appropriate reading culture, poor staffing, poor funding, and of course, over admission or whatever. So the recommendations of the government was an evaluation by a regulatory body is mandatory. So there has to be an evaluation. There has to be an evaluation toolkit, and some regulatory body should be engaged into the evaluation toolkit of it, which should be uniform across the, or that can be, or certain points can depend upon the zones or whatever it is. Second is the professional bodies must live up to their responsibilities by lifting the standard of profession through quality education that can make the profession relevant to the national development agenda. I think this is also very important. The professional bodies that we also have in our country should also work. They have a responsibility. They do have a responsibility in lifting the standards. And also, like COA is the statutory body. We have other professional bodies also. So we have the professional bodies have the responsibilities to do this on the national agenda. And if this happens, if there is a regulatory authority, and if the professional bodies and the regulatory bodies, they work, and they work in relation to one another, in with that fine linkage, then only we can, I think, in any country, they can serve the, this thing. So with this, I basically would like to stop my presentation. But before I conclude, I would like to say a few more things. I think in today's context, the call of the day is researchers in architecture. Architecture researchers should also take, I mean, some of you can, some of this approach of developing a framework or a guideline for assessment or measuring the, I mean, the qualitative aspects of the education program. Quantitatively, okay, it's fine. How many students are coming into A grade, B grade, C grade, or whatever it is? That is also not uniform across the country. A uniform framework is absolutely necessary, which is the call of the day. As a researcher, I think there are many of us who are still into our PhD programs and research programs, and I think it is required. We have to have a new system of architectural education. Maybe within the bound syllabus and guidelines, the framework, I am definite to say that the framework will make a lot of difference. We don't have a unified methodology or a framework or a concept of evaluating what we are teaching and to what level we are teaching. Thank you. So I stop here. So I am now open to questions, if
Yeah.
any.
Thank you so very much, sir. It was well-structured presentation. You have taken us through the processes of learning, and it was well connected with the education system. Now, I would like to read out the questions framed by the panelists and by the attendees. However, they're coming through different platforms. There are parallel WhatsApp groups which are working with this. So I'm reading out all the questions being framed on all the platforms. So the first question is coming from architect Josana. She says, I agree with sir's comment that most pass outs lack practical knowledge simply because it was not in the domain of an architect. But in the coming years, with the coming up of more newer digital age professionals like graphic designer, interior designer, do you feel that architecture will lose its importance? How to retain the respect and impetus of this profession?
Yes, well, I think architecture cannot in any way lose its importance. You know, however, if you look into the other engineering branches, there is a common saying that there are core engineering branches. What are they? Mechanical, electrical, civil. I think architecture is the core of all these, be it interior design, be it graphic designers or whatever. People, even I have my experience of teaching in Navi Mumbai, wherein from the colleges there, people, I mean, pass out students, they have even worked in film industry, in films, in set designs. So architecture is the architect, and if you look into the conventional role of an architect, the professional practice, we always say that the architect is the first man in and the last man out in any project. I think it's not, in today's context, it is just not buildings. Architects still functioning as interior design will be the first man in and the last man out within the domain of work. So architecture will not lose its impetus. Rather, we should look in a more positive way and say that we are actually diversifying architecture and the role of an architect. So we are making branches, and these diversifications will actually in days to come will solve the problem of employment generation of the passouts. Architecture is one field where we proudly say, any school says, we don't need campus interviews. All our students are employed. They get work somewhere or the other.
True, sir.
That is probably because of this.
She has outlined another concern of her. So she's saying that, she was basically referring to the Nigeria Design Studio example you have framed in the presentation, and saying that while taking Design Studio, we also have a major and a minor problem. We almost give 70% weightage to the major problem and rest to the minor problem, but only 2 months of a semester to minor problem. Instead of giving 2 problems in 6 months, which is not sufficient time for one semester, can we propose a different design problem structure? And we can go for or opting out only one design problem. So basically she's putting up how we prioritize the time and the problem.
Yes, I think definitely we can do that, because in nowhere in the COA guidelines or any regulatory authority guidelines we have been said that we give one minor and one major problem. What all matters is that within the syllabus context, the syllabus is basically the guideline for the teacher. Now, if the teacher improvises on or makes his or her own tailor-made problem, then there is no problem with it. I think that would be much better, because often it happens that one student does not concentrate on the minor problem and or the major problem and the minor problem and whatever. There's a lot of confusions, and even if this concept of major and minor problems are there, I think they should be interrelated with one another. I mean, the output of the minor problem should come in as a design brief of the major problem, and probably we can go ahead. So the level of complexity or the level of the class of the building, so that should also I mean, you can take out any portion of it and then design your own thing. You can, I think we all as teachers are free to do that.
True, sir. We have another question coming from a faculty of APJ. The person saying, does the privatization of education impacts the quality of architectural education?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Would you like to elaborate? I think the person wants to hear out.
Yes, privatization. See, it is very clear. It is very clear that higher education is not the stake of the government. Primary education is the stake of the government. So higher education is higher education, if privatized, on the other hand, I think is more streamlined. Okay, and we have a lot of private schools in our college today, where we have a lot of qualified teachers. We have qualified, experienced teachers. Take for example your institution. We have so many good teachers, like Dr. Bipasha is here. I mean, so experienced teachers are there. And even if you look into some schools like AIT, Manipal, and so on. I think the output of the students or the product of the schools, as we can tag them, I think that is good enough. The concept of privatization and government or public is very thin today. I mean, after the NEP 2022, how much of it will actually be there, I really doubt. So, and I think privatization is good in specific ways. From the students' point of view, I think they should not be a matter. It should not be an issue.
Okay, thank you, sir, for the answer. We are having another question being framed at WhatsApp platform. The person is saying, I believe there is a partial integration of all the 7 ways of learning in architecture education. What can be the comprehensive method to inculcate them all in today's scenario for effective output?
In today's scenario of?
In today's scenarios for effective output.
Okay. Yes, comprehensive method, I think, should be a tailor-made one, because the comprehensive method for the first semesters will be different module, and for the 9 semesters will be a different module. So it depends upon the teacher that how he or she frames the comprehensive module, and basically teach or bring up that inquisitiveness within the student to learn rather than to teach. So I don't think there is any comprehensive model which is existing, which is validated and existing, and I can say that yes, there is a model like that. So there is no such model. Of course, if the domain of research is open to the researchers, somebody who would be having who is interested to have doing research in this pedagogy, architectural pedagogy, may come out with one.
Thank you so much, sir, for this amazing question answer round. And I think all the participants must be satisfied with the answers framed. Now, I would like to hand it over to Bipasha ma'am to felicitate you officially for the session. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kanika. Thank you so much, Dr. Subhrajit, for your lovely presentation with different methods of innovative method, as well as to give an outline of the conventional approach in the teaching, especially in the design studio, and also what is happening in some of the countries across the world. This was quite a bit of eye-opening, I suppose, information which may have been well appreciated by the participants also. So now I would just like to officially, or virtually rather, just felicitate you through this particular thing. This word of the School of Architecture and Planning, APJ, Tirinada. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to have a wonderful session. And I think it was more of learning for me in the morning session. So I really enjoyed the entire day. And I really thank both of you. And of course, your director, sir, Professor Sabriwal, to have this opportunity. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now to the participants, they may, the feedback forms are already there in the chat, so they are requested to fill that. And we all will be joining back tomorrow morning at the same time, 10 o'clock. So bye to all and have a nice day, evening rather. Take care.
Should I end the session, ma'am?
Yeah, sure, ma'am.
Okay.